Useless girl. Do you have any idea what you've just ruined? Arthur Sterling's roar tore through the elegant silence of the Aperture restaurant. People trembled. The air grew thick as the powerful billionaire declared a $500 million deal had just gone up in smoke. The future of Lena, the black waitress, seemed to be over in an instant. But she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't even utter a single word of apology. Amidst the suffocating silence, she lifted her head. Her eyes held not a flicker of fear, only a chilling, terrifying focus. That strange composure seemed to be the greatest provocation, causing Sterling's rage to flare even brighter. He opened his mouth, ready to deliver the final blow. And that's when she responded. "Where are you watching this from? Morning? Noon? Or night?" Don't forget to subscribe to discover what kind of response can extinguish a fury and change everything. Have you ever used silence and wisdom to face a storm? Share your story in the comments below. The clink of silverware against porcelain was the only sound that dared to break the silence at Aperture, a minimalist shrine of a restaurant tucked into the heart of New York's financial district. Its sleek black tables and frosted glass walls gleamed under dim, curated lighting, a stage where the city's elite played their roles. The staff moved like ghosts, trained to be invisible, their steps muffled, their voices hushed. Lena Washington stood behind the polished counter, her hands steady as she arranged a tray of crystal glasses. Her hair, pulled into a low, elegant bun, stayed neatly in place as she scanned the room, her eyes catching the subtle shifts in posture among her colleagues. Something was coming. A murmur rippled through the staff as the heavy glass door swung open. Arthur Sterling stepped inside, his presence slicing through the air like a blade. The clatter of a fork hitting a plate rang out, then stopped abruptly, as if the room itself held its breath. Lena's co-worker, Sarah, stiffened beside her, her fingers tightening around a napkin. "It's him," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sterling." Lena didn't respond, but her gaze locked onto the man. His walk was deliberate, each step of his polished shoes echoing with purpose, a rhythm that demanded attention. Sterling's reputation preceded him like a shadow. The staff had traded stories in the break room, their voices low as if speaking his name too loudly might summon him. There was the tale of the chef who'd wept after Sterling sent back a bisque for being 2 degrees too cold. Another about a manager who'd quit after a single night of his relentless complaints. Yet woven into the fear was something else, an odd reverence, as if his cruelty was a badge of his genius, a relic of the tech empire he'd built from nothing. Lena, trained in behavioral psychology, saw more than the myths. She noticed Sarah's shoulders hunch, the way a busboy's hands trembled as he refilled a water pitcher. Fear, yes, but also anticipation. They weren't just afraid of Sterling. They were watching him, waiting for the storm. Lena's eyes flicked to the hostess, who was already guiding Sterling to a corner table. Her table. She felt the weight of the room shift, every glance darting between her and the man now settling into his seat. Sarah leaned closer, her breath quick. "Good luck. Don't mess this up." Lena offered a faint smile, her mind already working. She'd served men like Sterling before, titans who wielded their wealth like a weapon, their words sharp enough to cut. But she'd learned to navigate them, to read the twitch of a jaw or the flicker of an eyelid. Her years at Columbia, buried in research on micro-expressions, had sharpened her instincts. She didn't just see people, she saw through them. As she approached Sterling's table, tray balanced with practiced ease, she noted his posture. Spine rigid, hands folded, fingers tapping an uneven rhythm against the tablecloth. He didn't look up, his attention fixed on a phone screen, but Lena sensed the weight of his awareness. He was testing the room, testing her before she'd even spoken. She set a glass of water before him, the ice clinking softly. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice steady, clear. No response. Instead, he pushed the glass an inch to the left, his lips pursing as if it offended him. "Too cold," he muttered, still not meeting her eyes. "Bring another." Lena nodded, retrieving the glass without a flicker of irritation. She'd expected this. Men like Sterling thrived on control, on bending others to their will. But she wasn't here to break. She was here to survive. Her student loans, her sister's tuition, her own relentless drive to prove she belonged in a world that often looked past her. As she returned with a fresh glass, she caught Sarah's wide-eyed stare from across the room, a silent warning. The other servers had slowed their movements, their tasks forgotten, watching the scene unfold. Even the diners, usually lost in their own conversations, seemed to sense the shift, their voices dropping to whispers. Sterling finally looked up, his gaze sharp, cutting through her like a spotlight. "The light," he said, his voice low but commanding, "is too bright. Adjust it." Lena paused just for a moment, her mind cataloging his tone, the slight tilt of his head. It wasn't a request. It was a gauntlet thrown down, a challenge to see if she'd falter. She nodded again, moving to signal the manager, but her eyes never left him. There was something deliberate in his movements, a calculated edge to his complaints. This wasn't just a man being difficult. This was a performance. As she stepped back, preparing to take his order, she felt the room's tension coil tighter. The other servers hovered, their movements hesitant, as if waiting for the inevitable explosion. Sterling's fingers resumed their tapping, faster now, a staccato beat that seemed to echo the pulse of the restaurant. Lena straightened, her breath even, her focus unwavering. She didn't know what game Sterling was playing, but she was ready. The night had just begun, and the stage was set for something far bigger than a spilled drink or a sharp word. Something was coming, and Lena Washington was not one to back down. Lena Washington glided back to Arthur Sterling's table, her steps measured, her tray balanced with a fresh glass of water. The air in aperture seemed to hum with a low, electric charge, the kind that precedes a storm. The diner's whispers had faded, their eyes darting toward Sterling's corner, where he sat like a king holding court. His fingers, still tapping that uneven rhythm, paused as Lena set the glass down. She caught the flicker of his gaze, not at her, but at the glass, as if measuring its placement to the millimeter. "Better," he muttered, but the word carried an edge, a challenge unspoken. Lena nodded, her face a mask of calm, though her mind was already dissecting the moment. The rhythm of his tapping, 4 beats, then 3, then 2, wasn't random. It was deliberate, a signal of control, not impatience. She stepped back, menu in hand, ready to take his order, but Sterling waved it away. "Not yet," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the room's hush. "The light's still off. Dim it more." Lena's eyes flicked to the overhead fixtures, already softened to a glow that bathed the restaurant in a calculated warmth. She signaled the manager, who hurried to adjust the controls, but her focus stayed on Sterling. His posture hadn't shifted, yet there was a tension in his shoulders, a slight tightening of his jaw. He was testing her. She was sure of it, but the why eluded her. Years of studying behavioral psychology had taught her to trust these instincts, to see the patterns others missed. This wasn't about water or lighting. This was a game. As she waited for his next move, Sarah sidled up, her voice a hurried whisper. "Careful, Lena. He's in a mood. Last time he sent back a steak because the plate was too white." Her eyes were wide, a mix of awe and dread, but Lena caught the undertone, Sarah's doubt that she could handle him. It wasn't the first time she'd felt that edge from a colleague, the unspoken assumption that she didn't belong in Aperture's polished world. Lena brushed it off, her focus sharpening. She didn't have time for Sarah's insecurities. Not tonight. Sterling set a leather briefcase on the table's edge, its weight making the cloth dip slightly. He opened it with a flourish, revealing a stack of papers covered in dense charts and numbers. Lena's eyes narrowed. The top sheet was pristine, but the way he angled it toward her felt staged, like a prop in a play. He picked up his phone, his voice rising just enough for nearby tables to hear. "The merger's at $500 million, he barked into the receiver. "If it's not signed by dawn, heads will roll." The words were sharp, performative, and the diners around him shifted uncomfortably, their forks hesitating mid-bite. Lena watched his free hand, the one not holding the phone. It wasn't clenched in anger. It was relaxed, almost too relaxed. She moved to refill a nearby table's water, keeping Sterling in her peripheral vision. His conversation grew louder, peppered with phrases like non-negotiable, and make it happen. The other servers slowed their steps, their trays wobbling as they stole glances at him. Even the manager, usually unflappable, hovered near the bar, his eyes darting between Lena and Sterling. The room felt like a stage, and Sterling was directing every scene. But Lena wasn't here to play a bit part. She'd clawed her way through Columbia's lecture halls, paid for with late-night shifts and sheer will, all to keep her sister in school and her own dreams alive. She'd faced worse than a man with a loud voice and a briefcase. Sterling snapped the phone shut, his eyes locking onto hers. "Wine," he said, not looking at the menu. "Chateau Margaux, 96, and don't dawdle." Lena nodded, turning toward the cellar, but her mind was racing. The specificity of the order, the way he'd waited until she was close to speak. It was another move in his game. She recalled a lecture on micro-expressions. A raised eyebrow, a fleeting smirk, could betray intent. Sterling's face had given nothing away, but his hands told a different story. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a slow, deliberate stroke of the briefcase's handle. He was setting a trap, and she was meant to walk into it. As she retrieved the bottle, its dark glass cool against her palm, Sarah grabbed her arm. "Lena, don't screw this up. That's a $1,000 bottle. If he sends it back, it's on you." Lena met her gaze, her voice low but firm. "I've got this." She didn't, not entirely, but she wasn't about to let Sarah or Sterling see her falter. The restaurant's silence pressed in, the weight of every eye on her as she approached his table. The briefcase sat precariously close to the edge, its contents fanned out like bait. Lena's pulse quickened, but her hand stayed steady. Whatever Sterling was planning, she'd see it coming. The stage was set, and she was ready to play her part. Lena Washington carried the Chateau Margaux 96 toward Arthur Sterling's table, the bottle's weight grounding her as the restaurant's silence pressed in. The air at Aperture felt brittle, as if a single misstep could shatter it. Every eye followed her, diners pausing mid-sentence, servers frozen with trays in hand, Sarah's nervous glance darting from the bar. Sterling's briefcase still teetered on the table's edge, its stack of papers fanned out like a dare. Lena's pulse thrummed, but her hands were steady, her training in behavioral psychology sharpening her focus. She'd caught the deliberate pause in Sterling's movements, the way his fingers lingered on the briefcase's handle. This wasn't just a wine order, it was the next act in his game. She positioned herself beside his table, angling the bottle to pour with precision. The dark liquid gleamed under the dim lights, its aroma sharp and rich. Sterling's eyes flicked up, not to her, but to the bottle, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Lena read it instantly, a micro-expression, a signal of intent. Before she could adjust, his elbow shot out, a swift, calculated motion that caught the bottle's neck. The Chateau Margaux tilted, and a crimson cascade spilled across the table, soaking the briefcase and splattering the papers inside. Gas rippled through the restaurant, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the air from the room. Sterling surged to his feet, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "You idiot!" his voice roared, a guttural snarl that silenced even the whispers. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" His arm swept toward the briefcase, now dripping red, the papers splayed in disarray. "This is a $500 million deal, ruined because of your incompetence." Lena stood still, the bottle still in her grip, its remaining contents sloshing faintly. Sarah, at the bar, dropped a glass. It shattered, but no one moved to clean it. The manager, pale-faced, hurried toward the table, his hands raised in a futile attempt to calm the storm. Sterling's tirade didn't stop. "I want her gone," he bellowed, pointing at Lena. "Fired now, and she'll pay for this. Every cent of that briefcase, every page of that contract." His voice carried a venom that made diners flinch, their forks abandoned, their eyes locked on the scene. Sarah's face was a mask of panic, her earlier warning to Lena now a grim prophecy. The manager stammered, "Sir, please, we'll handle this." But his words drowned in Sterling's fury. The restaurant felt like a pressure cooker, the tension ready to burst. Lena set the bottle down, her movements slow, deliberate. Her mind raced, cataloging every detail, the way Sterling's voice cracked on incompetence, too sharp to be genuine, The briefcase is leather, glossy and unmarred despite the spill. The papers, oddly pristine beneath the wine stain. She'd studied enough stage behaviors to know this wasn't an accident. His outburst was too theatrical, his gestures too precise. She caught a fleeting glint in his eye, not rage, but something closer to anticipation. This was his trap, and he was waiting for her to crumble. But Lena didn't crumble. She straightened, her breath even, her gaze meeting his without flinching. The room's silence deepened, every ear straining for her response. Sarah's warning echoed in her mind. Don't screw this up. But so did her own resolve, forged through years of late-night shifts and lecture halls where she'd fought to be seen. She wasn't here to beg or break. Her fingers brushed the edge of the table, steadying her as she scanned the papers again. The wine hadn't spread as it should. The leather repelled it like a shield. Her lips pressed into a thin line, not from fear, but from clarity. This was no mistake. It was a test. The manager hovered, his voice trembling as he tried to mediate. Miss Washington, please, step back. But Lena didn't move. She felt the weight of every stare. Diners, servers, Sarah's mix of pity and dread. Sterling loomed over her, his presence a wall of authority. But she saw through it. His shoulders were too squared, his anger too rehearsed. She'd read men like him before, men who thought power could bend the world to their will. But Lena had her own power, honed in classrooms and survival, and she wasn't about to let it falter now. As Sterling's rant slowed, his eyes narrowed, waiting for her to speak, to apologize, to plead. The restaurant held its breath, the moment teetering on the edge of explosion. Lena's hand rested on the bottle, cool against her palm, and her mind locked onto one certainty. Whatever Sterling expected, she wasn't going to give it to him. The stage was his, but the next move was hers. The silence in Aperture was deafening, a vacuum left in the wake of Arthur Sterling's tirade. The spilled Chateau Margaux glistened on the table, a crimson accusation pooling around his briefcase, its papers splayed like casualties of war. Diners sat frozen, their eyes wide, forks suspended midair. Sarah, behind the bar, clutched a towel, her face pale with secondhand panic. The manager's stammering apologies hung uselessly, drowned by the weight of Sterling's demand. Fire Lena Washington, make her pay. But Lena stood unmoved, the bottle still in her hand, its cool glass anchoring her against the storm. Her gaze locked onto Sterling, reading the subtle twitch at the corner of his mouth, a micro-expression that betrayed not rage, but expectation. She set the bottle down, the soft clink slicing through the tension. Every eye followed her, waiting for the tears, the pleading, the collapse Sterling seemed to demand. Instead, Lena reached for one of the wine-stained papers, lifting it with deliberate care. She held it to the light, her movements slow, almost ceremonial. The page was blank, pristine beneath the superficial red streaks. A murmur rippled through the restaurant, soft at first, then louder as diners leaned forward, straining to understand. Sarah's jaw dropped, and the manager's hands froze mid-gesture. Lena's voice, when it came, was steady, cutting through the room like a blade. This isn't a contract, is it, Mr. Sterling? The question hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Sterling's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. Lena placed the paper back on the table, its blankness a silent indictment. You've been testing me, she said, her tone calm but firm, each word measured to carry across the room. The water, too cold. The light, too bright. And now this. She gestured to the briefcase, its leather gleaming, untouched by the wine stain. This was no accident. You wanted to see how I'd react. The diner's whispers grew, a low hum of disbelief, but Lena's focus never wavered. She stepped closer, her presence commanding in its quiet strength. Sarah gasped audibly, her towel slipping to the floor. The manager, caught between shock and confusion, took a hesitant step forward, as if to intervene. But Lena's voice stopped him cold. You thought I'd beg, didn't you? She said to Sterling, her eyes never leaving his. Or maybe panic, grovel for forgiveness over a deal that doesn't exist. She tapped the blank paper, her finger leaving a faint red smudge. But I'm not here to play your game. My dignity isn't something you can spill or buy. The words landed like stones, each one heavier than the last, and the restaurant seemed to hold its breath, caught in the gravity of her defiance. Sterling's face betrayed nothing, but Lena saw the tell, a slight tightening of his jaw, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. She'd studied enough behavioral cues to know she'd hit a nerve. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected, not from a server in a room full of power he thought he controlled. The other servers, once paralyzed, now watched with a mix of awe and unease. Sarah's earlier doubt, her whispered warnings, seemed distant now, overshadowed by Lena's unflinching calm. A diner at a nearby table leaned to his companion, murmuring, "Who is she?" But Lena didn't hear it. Her world had narrowed to the man before her, the architect of this staged chaos. She straightened, her posture a silent declaration of strength. "You can keep your briefcase, your papers, your wine," she said, her voice low but resonant, carrying to every corner of Aperture. "They don't define me, and they don't scare me." The room was a tableau of stunned faces, diners, servers, the manager, all caught in the moment's wait. Sterling's hands, once poised to strike the table again, stilled. For the first time he looked at her, really looked, his gaze sharp but searching, as if seeing something he hadn't anticipated. Lena took a step back, her movements deliberate, her breath even. She'd faced worse than this. Classrooms where her voice was dismissed, shifts where customers looked through her. She'd built her life on proving them wrong, on carrying her sister's dreams alongside her own. Sterling's outburst, his calculated trap, was just another challenge, and she'd met it head-on. The restaurant remained frozen, the silence now charged with a different energy, not fear, but anticipation. Something had shifted, and everyone felt it. Sterling's next move, whatever it was, would have to answer to her. Lena stood ready, her eyes never leaving his, as the stage prepared for its next act. The silence in Aperture stretched taut, a wire ready to snap. Lena Washington stood before Arthur Sterling, the blank paper she'd lifted from his wine-stained briefcase still resting on the table, its emptiness a silent accusation. The restaurant's collective gaze bore down, diners frozen, their meals forgotten, servers, including Sarah, gaping from the sidelines. The manager rooted in place, his hands twitching as if unsure whether to intervene. Sterling's outburst had scorched the room, but Lena's calm defiance had shifted the air, turning his stage into hers. Her words, "My dignity isn't something you can spill or buy," still echoed, and now every eye waited for Sterling's response. But Lena wasn't done. She stepped closer, her voice steady, resonant, cutting through the hush like a blade through fog. "You planned this, Mr. Sterling," she said, her eyes locked on his. "Every detail, the water, the light, the briefcase." She gestured to the table, where the wine glistened harmlessly on the leather, repelled by its impervious surface. "You wanted to see me break, panic, beg, maybe even cry over your fake contract." Her tone held no anger, only clarity, each word a precise strike. "But you miscalculated. You thought you could measure me with a stage spill and a few harsh words." Sterling's face was a mask, but Lena saw the telltale signs her training had taught her to catch. A slight clench in his jaw, a flicker of his eyelids. He wasn't angry anymore, if he ever had been. He was recalibrating, caught off guard by her refusal to crumble. The diner's whispers grew, a low buzz of astonishment. But Lena's focus remained razor-sharp. "I've spent years studying how people move, how they hide what they feel," she continued, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "Your fingers tapped a rhythm, 4, 3, 2, when you complained about the light, controlled, not impatient. Your elbow hit that bottle with precision, not accident." She paused, letting the words sink in. "This wasn't about a merger, it was about me." Sarah, still clutching the bar counter, let out a choked gasp, her earlier warnings to Lena now a distant memory. The manager took a hesitant step forward, murmuring, "Miss Washington, please," but his voice faltered under the weight of the moment. A diner at a nearby table leaned forward, his phone half raised as if tempted to record the scene. Lena ignored them all, her world narrowed to the man before her. Sterling's hands, once poised to strike the table again, lay still, his fingers curled slightly, betraying a shift from control to curiosity. "You wanted to test my limits," Lena said, her voice rising just enough to command the room. "To see if I'd bow to your anger, your wealth, your power. But you made a mistake." She leaned in, her gaze unwavering. "Dignity isn't something you can orchestrate or break. It's not in your papers, your briefcase, or your billion-dollar deals. It's in how we treat each other when we think we hold all the cards." She placed the blank paper back on the table, its edge curling slightly in the wine's residue. "Your test failed, Mr. Sterling. Not because of me, but because you thought you could define me with it." The restaurant was a tableau of stunned silence. Sarah's eyes darted between Lena and Sterling, her earlier skepticism replaced by something like awe. The diners, no longer pretending to eat, stared openly, their murmurs stilled. Even the manager seemed paralyzed, his authority dwarfed by the gravity of Lena's words. Sterling, for the first time, said nothing. His eyes, sharp and searching, met hers, and for a fleeting moment, Lena saw something new. Surprise, perhaps, or the faintest crack in his armor. She'd studied enough micro-expressions to know she'd struck deeper than he'd expected. Lena straightened, her breath even, her resolve unshaken. She'd faced rooms that doubted her, systems that overlooked her. Yet she'd carved her path through them with grit and intellect. Sterling's trap, his staged fury, was just another hurdle, and she'd cleared it without flinching. She took a step back, her movements deliberate, signaling the end of her stand. The room remained frozen, not in fear now, but in anticipation of what Sterling would do next. His silence was louder than his earlier shouts, a void that demanded to be filled. Lena's eyes never left his, her stance a quiet challenge. She'd laid bare his game, turned his test against him, and now the next move was his. The restaurant held its breath, the tension coiling tighter, as if the very walls awaited the fallout. Whatever came next, Lena was ready, not as a server, but as a woman who'd just rewritten the rules of the stage. The silence in Aperture held like a held breath. Lena Washington's words, "Your test failed, Mr. Sterling," still ringing in the air. The restaurant was a frozen tableau, diners staring, their meals abandoned, servers, including Sarah, rooted in place, their trays forgotten. The manager, his face a mask of shock, unable to bridge the chasm Lena had carved with her defiance. The blank paper lay on the table, its wine-stained edge curling, a mute testament to her unraveling of Sterling's game. Arthur Sterling himself stood motionless, his hands no longer poised for attack, his sharp eyes fixed on Lena with an intensity that felt less like anger and more like scrutiny. The room waited, teetering on the edge of what came next. Lena folded her arms, her posture steady, her gaze unyielding. She'd called out his charade, the fake contract, the stage spill, the calculated fury, and turned his test against him. She expected retaliation, a sharper barb, or perhaps a dismissal to cement his authority. Instead, Sterling's silence stretched, heavy with something she couldn't yet name. Her years of studying behavioral psychology told her this was no ordinary pause. It was a recalibration, a man reassessing his opponent. The diner's whispers began to creep back, a low hum of disbelief, but Lena's focus remained locked on him, ready for whatever move he'd make. Then a new sound broke the tension, a slow, deliberate clap from the far corner of the room. Heads turned, and a man rose from a table tucked in the shadows. He was unassuming, his navy suit crisp but understated, his movements measured as he approached Sterling's table. Lena's eyes flicked to him, cataloging details, the way his glasses caught the light, the slight slump of his shoulders as if carrying an unseen weight. "Well, Arthur," he said, his voice low but clear, carrying a hint of amusement, "I think you found what you were looking for." The restaurant stirred, confusion rippling through the crowd. Sarah's brow furrowed, her earlier awe at Lena's stand now tinged with bewilderment. The manager took a hesitant step forward, murmuring, "Mr. Vance?" But the man, Marcus Vance, as Lena would later learn, waved him off, his focus on Sterling. Lena's pulse quickened, her mind racing to piece together this new player. Vance stopped beside the table, his hands clasped loosely, and continued, his tone almost conversational. You've tested dozens, Arthur. CEOs, philanthropists, even that hedge fund kid who tried to bribe you. All failed. But her? He nodded toward Lena, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She's different. Lena's eyes narrowed, her instinct screaming that this was the twist she hadn't seen coming. Sterling's gaze shifted to Vance, then back to her, his silence now a canvas for something unspoken. Vance spoke again, addressing the room as much as Sterling. The Sterling Legacy Foundation needs someone with spine, someone who can't be bought or broken. You've been looking for months, Arthur, staging these performances. He gestured to the briefcase, its pristine leather mocking the spilled wine. And tonight, you got your answer. The diners erupted in murmurs, phones now openly raised capturing the scene. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the bar, her earlier warnings to Lena dissolving into stunned realization. The manager, still hovering, looked as if he might faint, his authority unraveling in the face of this revelation. Lena's mind whirred, connecting dots. The complaints, the briefcase, the blank papers, all part of a test, not of her service, but of her character. Sterling hadn't been trying to humiliate her. He'd been searching for something, and she'd just passed. Sterling finally spoke, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier venom. You saw through it, he said, his eyes still on Lena, searching. Most don't. It wasn't an apology, but it carried a weight that silenced the room again. Lena didn't flinch, her arms still crossed, her stance unwavering. I saw what you wanted me to see, she said, her voice steady, but I'm not here for your games. She turned, moving toward the kitchen, her steps deliberate, leaving the blank paper and the stunned restaurant behind. Vance's smile widened, a rare spark of approval. That's the one, Arthur, he said softly, almost to himself. Sterling nodded, a slow, reluctant gesture, his eyes following Lena as she disappeared through the swinging doors. The diner's whispers grew louder, a mix of awe and speculation, some already typing furiously on their phones. The stage had shifted, the trap revealed, and Lena had walked away, not as a server, but as the one who'd rewritten the rules. The restaurant buzzed with a new energy, the tension now laced with anticipation. Whatever Sterling and Vance had planned, Lena had just changed the script. 3 days after the scene at Aperture, Lena Washington stepped out of an elevator onto the 60th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, the city's skyline sprawling beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. The office was stark, all glass and steel, a temple to precision that mirrored the man waiting inside. Arthur Sterling sat behind a desk, his posture less imposing than at the restaurant, but his presence still heavy, like a storm held in check. Lena's steps were steady as she crossed the polished floor, her mind replaying the events of that night. The spilled wine, the blank paper, her own voice cutting through the restaurant's stunned silence. Marcus Vance's words had lingered. Sterling had been searching for someone unbreakable. Now she was here to find out why. Sterling gestured to a chair, his voice quieter than she expected. Sit. Lena did, her gaze meeting his without hesitation. The memory of his stage fury, the briefcase, the calculated test still burned, but she kept her expression neutral, her years of studying human behavior guiding her. She noticed the subtle shift in his demeanor. No tapping fingers, no performative edge. This was a different Sterling, one stripped of the restaurant's theatrics. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, and spoke. You saw through me. Not many do. Lena didn't respond immediately, letting the silence settle. She'd faced rooms that underestimated her, shifts where she was invisible, yet she'd built her life on proving them wrong. I saw what you showed me, she said finally, her voice even. A game designed to push me until I broke. I didn't. Sterling's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but a flicker of acknowledgement. He leaned back, his eyes searching hers, as if testing her resolve one last time. I built an empire from nothing, he began, his tone measured, carrying the weight of years. But I learned early that trust is a luxury I couldn't afford. A partner, someone I called a friend, took half of it when my back was turned. He paused, his fingers brushing the desk's edge, a rare glimpse of vulnerability. The Sterling Legacy Foundation is my attempt to leave something better, a fund to lift up those who deserve it, who fight for it. His gaze sharpened. But it needs someone who can't be swayed, someone who sees through the noise. You, Miss Washington, did that. Lena's pulse quickened, but her face remained steady. She'd pieced together the foundation's purpose from Vance's words at Aperture: scholarships for young talent. A lifeline for those like her sister, scraping by on dreams and grit. But this, sitting across from Sterling, felt like stepping into the heart of his game. You tested others, she said, not a question but a statement. And they failed. Sterling nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. Some groveled. Others tried to charm their way through. One even offered to pay for the briefcase. A dry laugh escaped him, sharp and fleeting. You didn't. You turned the test on me. The words hung between them, a bridge from the restaurant's chaos to this moment. Lena leaned forward slightly, her voice firm. I'm not here to be flattered, Mr. Sterling. You put me through a crucible in front of a room full of people. Why? His eyes met hers, unflinching. Because the foundation needs a leader who can stand up to power, who can see through lies and still hold their ground. You didn't just pass, Miss Washington. You taught me something. He slid a folder across the desk, its contents outlining a role. Director of New Initiatives for the Sterling Legacy Foundation. Full funding for your doctorate, he said. A salary that will change your life, your sister's life. A chance to shape the future for others like you. Lena's fingers brushed the folder, but she didn't open it. Her mind churned. Her student loans, her sister's tuition. The weight of a life spent fighting for every inch. But this wasn't about money. It was about what she stood for. I don't want your charity, she said, her voice low but clear. If I take this, it's for the people who need it, the ones who fight like I do. Sterling's gaze softened, just a fraction, but enough for Lena to see it, a crack in the armor of a man who'd built walls against the world. That's why it's you, he said simply. Lena stood, the folder in hand, her resolve unshaken. She'd walked into Aperture 3 days ago as a server. Now she stood on the edge of something bigger. I'll consider it, she said, her eyes holding his. But not because of your test, because of what I can do with it. She turned, leaving the office, the city's lights stretching out below. The game had shifted, and she was no longer just a player. She was rewriting the rules. 6 months after her confrontation with Arthur Sterling, Lena Washington stood on a stage in a sleek Manhattan auditorium, the Sterling Legacy Foundation's emblem gleaming behind her. Rows of young faces stared up, their eyes bright with hope, their families clutching programs in the front seats. Lena's voice carried across the room, steady and clear, as she announced the first wave of scholarships, full rides for students like her sister, who sat in the third row, beaming through tears. The applause rolled like thunder, but Lena's focus was inward, on the path that had brought her here. From the wine-stained table at Aperture to this moment, where she wasn't just a server, but a shaper of futures. The memory of that night lingered. Sterling's staged outburst, her own defiance, the blank paper that unraveled his test. She'd walked out of his office 3 days later with his offer in hand. Director of New Initiatives, a role that meant funding her doctorate and lifting others like her. She'd accepted, not for the money, but for the chance to give voice to those who fought against the odds. Now, as she stepped off the stage, the weight of that choice settled into pride. The auditorium buzzed with chatter, recipients hugging their parents. But Lena's eyes caught a familiar figure at the back, Sterling, leaning against a wall, watching in silence. She made her way through the crowd, her steps confident, her presence commanding respect without demanding it. Sterling hadn't attended the Foundation's events before, preferring to let Marcus Vance handle the spotlight. His being here was deliberate, just like every move he'd made that night at Aperture. As she approached, he straightened, his usual sharpness softened by something she couldn't quite name. You've done well, he said, his voice low, carrying none of the venom from their first encounter. Better than I expected. Lena met his gaze, her expression calm but unyielding. I didn't do it for your expectations, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I did it for them. She nodded toward the students, now mingling with excitement, their futures rewritten by the Foundation's support. Sterling's eyes followed her gesture, lingering on a young woman clutching a scholarship letter, her mother wiping tears nearby. For a moment he said nothing, his silence heavier than any of his staged rants. They walked toward the auditorium's exit, the city's evening lights flickering through the windows. Sterling paused, his hand brushing the edge of a chair, a gesture that felt almost human. I've spent decades building walls, he said, his tone quieter now, reflective. You reminded me they don't always work. Lena tilted her head, reading him as she had that night, his shoulders less rigid, his voice stripped of its edge. This wasn't the man who'd barked orders at Aperture. This was a man who'd learned something, just as she had. They stepped outside, the cool air a sharp contrast to the auditorium's warmth. Sterling glanced at her, a rare glint of humor in his eyes. I've made a reservation at Aperture, he said. Care to join me? Lena's smile widened, catching the irony. She nodded, and soon they sat across from each other in the restaurant that had once been their battleground. The servers moved with the same practiced invisibility, but the air felt different. No tension, no fear. A young waiter approached, holding a bottle of Chateau Margaux. Compliments of the house, he said, his hands steady as he poured. Sterling raised his glass, his gaze meeting Lena's. To ensuring it stays in the glass this time, he said, a dry edge to his voice. Lena laughed, a sound that carried the ease of equals, not adversaries. Only if you keep your elbows in check, she countered, raising her glass in return. The clink of crystal echoed softly, a quiet seal on their journey from confrontation to respect. The other diners glanced their way, but not with the fear of that night 6 months ago. Aperture, once a stage for Sterling's tests, now felt like a space reclaimed. As they sipped, Lena's thoughts drifted to her sister, to the students, to the work ahead. She'd taken Sterling's offer not for his approval, but for the power to change lives. He'd seen her as a test subject. She'd shown him she was more. Now they sat as allies, bound by a shared understanding that dignity wasn't a game to be won, but a truth to be lived. The restaurant hummed around them, its sleek elegance no longer a cage but a canvas for new beginnings. Lena leaned back, her glass catching the light, and knew this was only the start. And so, the stage at Aperture dims, leaving Lena Washington and Arthur Sterling not as adversaries, but as partners in a new chapter, bound by respect and a shared purpose. What did you feel as Lena turned the tables, as her dignity reshaped the game? Share your thoughts. Your reflections fuel the stories we tell. Thank you for joining us in this journey of courage and transformation. Until we meet again, keep seeking the truths that lie beyond the surface.